Rome tried to wipe her off the map. They shattered her statues, chiseled her face off every monument, and rewrote the history books, like she was never even born. But 2,000 years later, you're here. And so is she. This is the story of Valeria Messalina, the 15-year-old girl who became the Empress of Rome and turned the palace into a place ancient writers could barely whisper about without shaking. If you're down for a story your history class wouldn't dare touch, smash that subscribe button and drop a comment with the wildest historical figure you want us to dive into next. Because the story you're about to hear, Rome literally died trying to keep it a secret. The year is 48 AD. Somewhere deep in the marble guts of the Palatine Palace, a woman is changing her clothes. Not into the silk gowns of an empress, but into something cheap, something that stinks of the city streets. She tugs a dark wig over her famous golden hair, smearing kohl around her eyes until they look hollowed out and hungry. She gives herself one last look, then slips out a side door and disappears into the Roman night. Her name is Valeria Messalina. She is the Empress of Rome, and she's clocking in. The brothel is deep in the Subura, the part of town where the city stops, pretending, where the marble peels back and shows its grimy beating heart. We're talking narrow alleys that reek of stale wine and desperation, flickering oil lamps in doorways casting shadows that men stumble through, hunting for something their wives can't give them. And she walks right through the beggars and the drunks, like she owns the place. Because on this night, she does. To the madam, she's just Lesia, just another girl for the night, just another piece of flesh up for grabs. Some senator from Ostia in town on business picks her out of the lineup just looking to burn some time before he has to go home to his wife. He drops his coins, leads her to a room, and never for a second guesses that the woman now beneath him is the one who rules his entire world. And when he's done, he just leaves. But she stays. There are always more clients. And by the time the first rays of sun slice through the morning haze, she's back in the palace, washing off the cheap perfume, slipping back into imperial silk, and getting ready to watch the morning sacrifice to Vesta, the goddess of, get this, chastity. And nobody has a clue. Not yet, anyway. But you gotta back up, because a woman like this isn't born. She's forged in a fire that's meant to break her. 4 years earlier, Rome was hemorrhaging. The Emperor Caligula had turned the capital into his own personal twisted playground. Senators were forced to watch as he took their wives right there at dinner parties. He tried to make his horse a senator. He had people put down for sport, for a laugh, just because he was bored, and he could. So when the Praetorian Guard finally made their move in January of 41 AD, they didn't just take him out. They took his wife with him, and their baby daughter. They smashed her skull against a wall. See, Rome doesn't just kill its monsters. It salts the earth where they stood. The city is in a full-blown panic. Who's next? And then they find him cowering behind a curtain in the palace, a trembling, stammering mess. Claudius, the family joke, 50 years old with a limp and a stutter. The uncle no one ever took seriously. But he's breathing. He's got the right blood, and Rome needs a guy in purple robes before the whole empire collapses into a bloody civil war. So the guard makes him emperor, whether he wants the job or not. Claudius knows he's just been handed the keys to a house that's already on fire. He needs to look legit, and he needs it fast. He needs heirs. He needs to show everyone that the gods hadn't just up and quit on Rome. So he marries Valeria Messalina. She was 15 years old, a third cousin, to keep the bloodline pure. A beauty so profound that poets would spend their lives trying and failing to capture her face in words. Skin like moonlight, hair like spun gold, features so flawless they looked like they were sculpted by the gods themselves. She had been groomed for this exact moment, her entire short life schooled in virtue, trained to keep her eyes down, taught that her only worth was locked inside her womb and her purity. She was the living, breathing symbol of every lie Rome wanted to believe about itself. The Senate gave the nod. The people roared their approval. The empire, it seemed, had a future again. But here's the question nobody thought to ask. What do you think happens when you take a child and whisper in her ear that she's a goddess when you lock her in a palace, where every single door swings open at her command, where grown men in togas bow before her, where her husband is old enough to be her father and is scared to death of his own shadow? What happens when you tell her the only job she has is to be quiet, to be obedient, to be a chaste living statue of perfection? What happens when you give someone that much power, and then tell them the only rule is they're not allowed to use it? Rome was about to get its answer. The first 2 years went by. The book, a perfect fairy tale. Messalina gave Claudius a daughter, Claudia Octavia. Then she gave him a son, Britannicus, named for his father's big victory in Britain. The Senate could finally unclench. The succession was secure. And there she was, at every state event draped in modest silks. Her head covered her eyes, cast humbly to the floor, every single gesture a carefully choreographed performance of virtue. The perfect Roman wife. In public, she was the flawless queen they had created, but in private, behind closed doors, she was building an empire of her own. You see, Rome had always sorted its women into 2 neat little boxes, the wife and the whore, the sacred and the profane, the woman who stays home raising the children, and the woman who works in the alleys where men go to forget they're civilized. And the whole system only worked because those 2 worlds were never ever supposed to touch. Messalina looked at those 2 boxes and decided she was going to be both. The first whispers started slithering through the city around 42 AD. A senator coming home late from Ostia takes a detour through the Subura on a whim. He pays for a woman in a tiny cramped room that smells of cheap perfume, and when she turns to face him in the lamplight, his blood runs cold. He recognizes the Empress of Rome, not someone who looked like her. It was asterisk her asterisk. Now that story should have ended right there. It should have exploded into a scandal that would have utterly destroyed her. But it didn't. Because really, what was he gonna do? Rat out the Empress? To who her husband, the Emperor, the Senate, and say what? That he was slumming it in a brothel and just happened to see the most powerful woman in the world working a shift. He kept his mouth shut, just like all the others. They all kept their mouths shut. And she didn't just go that one time. She went all the time, using the name Lycia, becoming a regular at a joint run by some woman named Scylla. And it wasn't for the money. It wasn't out of some desperate need. It was for the rush. It was for the sheer power of stepping out of her golden cage and into the one place on earth where she could be completely anonymous. Every client who didn't recognize her was a pawn in her game. And every man who did asterisk, well, he became a man she owned because his silence was now a confession of his own guilt. She wasn't just breaking the rules. She was turning the hypocrisy that wrote them into a weapon. Because let's be real. Roman morality was always just an act. Senators had mistresses, generals hit the brothels, married men messed around with their servants, and nobody batted an eye. But the women, especially the high-born ones, and most especially the Empress, they were supposed to be above all that marble statues, baby makers, empty symbols. Messalina looked at that pretty gilded cage, and she just smiled as she walked right out the door. But the brothel, that was just the beginning. That was just the lab where she tested the limits of her own power. The real game was played inside the palace walls. The banquets always started out looking respectable enough. The cream of Roman society lounging on silk couches around low tables. Golden plates piled high with exotic food brushed with honey. Wine flowing from cups studded with jewels. Senators making polite chit-chat. Generals bragging about Britain. All very Roman. All very, very civilized. And then Messalina would give a little signal. The servants would disappear. The doors would be locked. And then the real asterisk guests would arrive. Gladiators who still smelled of arena sand and blood. Actors fresh from the stage. Foreign prisoners of war. And sometimes the teenage sons of the most powerful families brought their thinking they were about to discuss their fathers' careers. What went down next, the old historians could only describe with a mix of breathless horror and wide-eyed fascination. They were contests, games, public spectacles that would make even the most seasoned working girls blush. And here's the twisted genius of it. Every single person who played along was now an accomplice. Every person who just watched was now guilty. Messalina wasn't just getting her kicks. She was building an invisible network of shared shame, a spiderweb of secrets that tied the most powerful people in Rome to her will. Some senator tried to block one of her land deals. She'd just quietly remind him about that one night at the villa, about what he did, and about who saw him do it. He'd sign the deed. A general dared to question one of her political appointments. She'd casually mention his son, that one party, and all those witnesses. The general would back down. She had figured out something Rome's legions never could. You don't need an army to control powerful men. You just need to know the one secret: they pray to the gods, no one ever finds out. Her own mother Lepida tried to warn her. "Tone it down," she'd say. "Be careful, you're making too many enemies." But Messalina had learned a very different lesson from the world. In Rome there were no limits, not if you were willing to collect people's secrets like coins. Shame was the new currency, and exposure was a death sentence. She had built a blackmail machine so effective, so ruthless, it would make modern spy agencies blush. But that wasn't enough. She had to push it. The story goes, she throws down a challenge to a famous working girl named Scylla, a contest to see who could entertain more fellas in one night. And the details, man, they're recorded, with this insane precision that makes you stop and think, is this for real, or is this just some nasty smear campaign to wreck her reputation? The final score, 25 men. And she won. That story ripped through Rome like wildfire, a dirty little secret whispered in the forum, a punchline in the bars, and a straight-up nightmare for the Senate. But what was anyone gonna do about it? She was the Empress. She'd given Claudius his heirs. She was basically untouchable. Except she wasn't thinking about limits anymore. She was already looking for the next line to cross. And that's when Gaius Silius walks into the picture. He was everything Claudius wasn't: young, hot, from a blue blood family. Oh, and he was also married to one of the most respected women in the city. Messalina didn't give a damn. She wanted him, and by now she'd learned that for an empress, wanting something and taking it were one and the same. She made him divorce his wife, not behind closed doors, out in the open, a public humiliation, a cold-blooded demonstration of what happens when you get in her way. So Silius becomes her new boy toy. You'd think that would be the big scandal, right, the end of the story. But Messalina had spent years learning a dangerous lesson. There are no consequences when you're fast enough, when you know everyone's dirty laundry, when you have absolutely no shame. So picture this. It's the fall of 48 AD. Emperor Claudius is out of town down in Ostia, making sure Rome has enough food for the winter. And while the cat's away, Messalina does something that it shouldn't even be possible. She marries Gaius Silius, and not in some back-alley ceremony. We're talking broad daylight, with witnesses, the whole 9 yards, contracts, vows, the works. I mean, she's already married to the Emperor of Rome, and she's just marrying another guy anyway, like she was daring the entire city to try and stop her. To this day, historians argue, was it a power play, a full-on coup to put Silius on the throne? Or had she just gone so far off the deep end that she didn't even see the lines anymore? Either way, she throws a massive party to celebrate. Wine flowing like it was water, music blasting through the halls. You had senators and generals there, some because they wanted to be, others because they were trapped, caught in her web for years. The whole scene was like a hallucination, like the entire city of Rome had gone completely insane. And all the while, down in Ostia, Claudius is just counting sacks of grain. The news finally gets to him, delivered by Narcissus, his right-hand man. See, Narcissus had been watching Messalina for years, quietly building a file, just waiting for her to go too far. And this was it. He didn't come empty-handed. He brought witnesses. Senators suddenly brave enough to talk, and he brought the marriage contract signed, sealed, and impossible to deny. Can you even wrap your head around that conversation, trying to tell the most powerful man in the world that his wife just married another dude, and then trying to make him believe something so completely insane? But the proof just kept piling up. The signatures, the eyewitnesses, and the sound of the Roman elite laughing behind his back as their emperor was made a fool of in front of the entire world. The rage that followed wasn't a fiery explosion. It was ice cold, and it was final. Claudius marches back to Rome, the Praetorian Guard at his heels. They find her at the gardens of Lucullus, the very place where she'd thrown so many of her wild parties. Her mother Lepida is with her, pleading with her to run, to hide, to do something. But Messalina just seems stuck, frozen, as if she can't process that after a decade of making Rome bend to her, the city was finally snapping back. Then the soldiers arrive. She knows their faces. She's seen them guarding the palace. Hell, she might have even had a few of them over to her villa. But now they were here for her. She hits her knees, begging, pleading. She even offers up her own kids, Octavia and Britannicus, just 9 and 7 years old. Anything, everything. The soldiers just stare back, blank-faced. Orders were orders. She grabs a dagger, her hand trembling. She puts the blade to her own throat, but she can't do it. A tribune steps out of the ranks and finishes the job for her. And just like that, Valeria Messalina, Empress of Rome, bleeds out on the very lawn where she once lorded over senators. She was 25 years old. Claudius issues the order, damnatio memoriae *, the damnation of her memory. They drag her statues through the streets and smash them to pieces. They take a chisel to her name on every monument. They literally rewrite the history books to pretend she was never there. The message couldn't be clearer. She never happened. And yet, 2,000 years later, here we are still talking about her. The cleanup is brutally efficient. Claudius gets hitched again within months to his own niece Agrippina, the younger. And let me tell you, she was smarter than Messalina, way more patient. She's the one who'd eventually slip Claudius some poison and put her own son Nero on the throne, kicking off a whole new era of crazy that would make people almost miss the days of Caligula and Messalina's kids. Their story is just as tragic. Her daughter Octavia is forced to marry her stepbrother Nero. Years later, he'll have her killed on a trumped-up adultery charge. She'd be 22 years old. Her son Britannicus gets poisoned at a dinner party when he's just 14. Nero most likely taking out the competition. He just collapsed, gone, before anyone could even react. The Senate acts like Messalina was never born, but the soldiers, they remembered. The servants remembered, and the families whose daughters vanished into her orbit, only to come back. Different, silent, broken. You better believe they remembered. But here's the question that still haunts people about her story. How much of it is actually true? All our sources are from guys writing decades after she was dead, men who had every reason to paint her as a complete monster. Roman propaganda had a formula, you see. Any powerful woman who got in the way of a man's ambition was immediately labeled a degenerate. Cleopatra Agrippina Livia. Messalina. It was the same old playbook every single time. Now does that make her innocent? Hell no. The marriage to Silius, that really happened. Even her supporters admit it. The political backstabbing was real. The blackmail schemes were real. People who crossed her ended up dead. But the wild party stories, the contests, the exact body counts, we'll just never know where the facts stop and the smear campaign begins. What we do know is this: a 15-year-old girl. If you go and stand in the ruins of the Palatine Hill today, you can feel something in the air. It's not ghosts. Rome isn't haunted in that way. It's something heavier. It's the sheer weight of stories that refuse to be silenced, even after they chiseled the names off the stone. Because that's the real secret about trying to erase someone from history. It never really works. You can smash the statues, you can scratch out the names, you can rewrite all the books you want, but you can't kill the story. Messalina's name was supposed to vanish into nothing. Instead, it became legendary, not because Rome wanted to remember her, but because the truth, no matter how ugly, no matter how deep you bury it, always finds a way to claw its way back into the light. Empires fall to invading armies, to deadly plagues, to economies crashing and burning. But Rome's story whispers something far more terrifying. It tells us they can also rot from the inside out. Messalina's tale isn't just some ancient gossip about her wild nights. It's a chilling look at what happens when power is just a game, when shame becomes the real currency, and when the very people meant to uphold an empire are too compromised to keep it from crumbling into dust. Every senator she had dirt on fell silent. Every general whose secrets she held stayed in line. Every powerful guest at her parties became an accomplice in the cover-up. Not out of loyalty, my friend, but out of fear. She proved you don't need an army to own a man. You just need to know the skeletons they prey never see the light of day. It's easy for us to sit here and tell ourselves we're better now, that we've evolved past the kind of decay that brought Rome to its knees. But take a hard look around. At any modern powerhouse, any government, any massive corporation, how many dark secrets are the glue holding it all together? How many powerful people are just staying quiet because the truth would absolutely destroy them? And how much of what we call order is just a fragile truce built on everyone knowing everyone else's dirty laundry? About 100 years after Messalina was gone, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote something down. He was trying to make sense of Rome's endless parade of heroes and villains. He said, "Look beneath. Don't let the true nature or value of a thing escape you." He was talking about leaders just like her people, who were all polish and shine on the outside, but were hollowed out and rotten to the core. But you know, he might as well have been warning us, because the real lesson here isn't that Messalina was some unique monster. The lesson is that Rome created her. They married her off at 15, handed her immense power with no real purpose, and then executed her when she used that power in a way that exposed their own hypocrisy. The Roman Forum still stands a ghost of its former self. The Colosseum draws in millions, but the Palatine Hill where the emperors lived their gilded lives, where Messalina pulled the strings, it's mostly just ruins now. Tourists walk past shattered columns and broken walls, taking pictures, reading little plaques about Augustus or Nero, with no clue they're standing in the very rooms where she hosted her games, where senators became her pawns, and where shame was weaponized into the ultimate form of control. There's a spot on the Palatine, a place where the marble floor is still impossibly smooth, worn down by 2,000 years of ghosts and footsteps. And if you stand there at sunset, when the crowds have gone, and the long shadows crawl across the stones, you can almost see her. The girl in the dark wig, slipping into the Roman night. The empress wrapped in silk, orchestrating scandals that would make a city blush. The woman in the garden on her knees, pleading for her life to soldiers who once trembled before her. She died at just 25 years old. Most of us get to live 3 times that long and barely make a sound. She was in power for less than a decade, yet her name still echoes across millennia, not because Rome wanted to remember her, but because they tried so desperately to erase her, they accidentally made her immortal. Her story exists in that space between who we're told we should be and who we secretly are. It lives in the chasm between public perfection and private hunger. It's the answer to the question of what happens when someone just flat out refuses to play by the rules designed to keep them in a pretty little cage. Rome gave her a role to play. Be quiet. Be a good wife. Be a symbol. She tore the script to pieces and wrote her own damn story, and when they killed her for it, they only proved what she knew all along. True power isn't about following the rules. It's about knowing exactly which ones you have to break. The bloodstains on the garden floor vanished centuries ago. The palace crumbled to dust. The empire that tried to strike her from its memory is now nothing but a memory itself. But on an autumn night in 48 AD, a woman in a dark wig walked out of the Palatine Palace and stepped directly into legend, not as the perfect empress they demanded, but as the one thing they could never ever control. Messalina. You remember that name? Rome tried to make the world forget it, and they failed.